Hi, Alan.
Hi, Louis. How are you?
I'm doing great. So I'm introducing Alan Cox today, who is one of my co-authors on our upcoming book, Relationships for Men by Men. And this is a book for men and women, and I can't wait for everybody to get hold of this book and also listen to the conversations that we've had. So thank you so much for this. And you are the person in this book that I quote the most because this is like literally what I quote for all my couples counseling clients and for all my men clients. So and this is the famous quote.
Mm.
This made such an impression on me when we talked about it the first time, when we talked about it on the summit. And if you can just very briefly recap that for me, because obviously not everybody has seen our conversation. Just what got you to get to the point to say, I will never cry again?
Well, um, my now wife, so everything worked out all right. And we've been married for 54 years now. So um, I think I was about 19 and she said she wanted to break up. And I cried. And, her response was not what I wanted. And so I just said to her, "You will never, ever see me cry again." And for a lot of years, she didn't. And you know what? It took me a lot of years to find out, in fact, probably about 20, that the only person, well, not the only person, but the person I was hurting the most was me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I do see this, that, well, women too, but men more, learn to put a damper on what they are really feeling. Um, I like that you say you realized that you were hurting yourself more because when you squished the crying, did you squish a whole range of emotions with it?
You isolate yourself
Mm, mm,
completely. And not just from, say, your wife or your husband, from your kids,
mm.
and it's just, I can see the moment in my mind right now. I can relive it, and the emotion is still there. Actually, you probably may see it, but yeah, and it's just, it was the most stupid thing to do.
It's
And
that,
the other shame was that it took me 20 years to discover that.
yeah. Well, it's that thing that we never forget what we learn in trauma, and then we make it our story. And
Yeah.
but there is a side that there are some women, there are some of our partners, the people who are important in our lives, who can't handle us
No.
sharing our vulnerability. And that is unfortunate that sometimes the people around us are not safe for us to be vulnerable because very often going to get corrected or shamed or criticized for having a feeling. And this is for grown-ups of all ages and all genders and all inclinations that we are very careful with where we show our feelings because we sometimes don't get the reaction we want. But it's quite a journey to get to the place where you say 20 years later, you realize you harmed yourself in those 20 years. And it's quite a journey to be able to own your tears or your vulnerability or your beliefs and not care if somebody else
Oh,
don't agree with you.
yeah. It's I've read Brené Brown's material on
Mm,
vulnerability. This isn't the last, just the last few years, and I know who I am now, and
mm,
I don't rely. I don't. It's not that I don't care, but I don't let other people's opinions impact on me at all.
mm.
Like if it's negative, if it's positive, that's I'm very open, but not if they're judgmental, they can. That's their problem, not mine.
Yeah,
It's their,
it's quite a skill to be able to hold it and not internalize it and go like, maybe there's some truth in it. Maybe I can use it. No, this is not working for me. No, don't need it. There's a skill in just evaluating it before you do anything with it.
Yes. Well, it's a skill that I've actually learned, and I do teach it now with an online course, but I also speak with a lot of mainly women, funnily enough, because they seem to be happy to be vulnerable. The guys just don't, they've got this mask up, and a lot of women have too. But I'm talking to 2 or 3 different individuals at the moment, and they are, one of them in particular is saying, if my husband doesn't learn to communicate with me, I'm out of here. And he's, I don't know, I'm speechless because she's a beautiful woman. I mean, she's very pretty as well, but I mean, inside she's a beautiful person. And he doesn't know what he's going to miss.
Yeah, that's a story for a lot of people. I think that's why our book is so important, because I know, like, we need to give this book to every living person. If you're a woman, you need to read it so that you know it's possible. If you're a man, you need to read it so that you know what's possible, because everybody who's participated in this have been so honest, and they've really shared, and they've all really grown to this place. And so it's very valuable. And so at least we have a book now that we can give to people to help them understand there's more. We don't have to stay in the way that the mold. We can break the mold, and we can create a new way of being.
And that takes vulnerability again. And self-awareness.
I want to go again. I want to go to the second slide, because I'm looking for the other quote, because there are 2 quotes of yours that I share all the time. Okay. So I want to see if it's in the second slide. And let's talk about your words that's coming straight from our book. Okay, that's a good one too. I was indifferent to her emotional pain, acting as if I didn't care. The problem was that most of the iceberg was below the surface. I felt the pain deep inside, out of sight. And the pain was intense. I knew I was hurting a person I loved, and that ate away at my soul. During those 20 years, whenever my wife got upset with me, I would shut her out, but I would bleed inside. Oh, Alan. Powerful words.
You've done it again. that just, the pain of that. And when I realized what it was doing, and that's what I meant about it was hurting me more, or as much as it was killing me. And I'm not a churchgoer anymore, but I do believe, and they talk about murder. And I think that when you do that to somebody, you're murdering their soul. And I was killing my own, as well as Mary's.
And in that process, when we are not vulnerable and we don't acknowledge the other person's feelings, because it's like when you squish one thing, you squish the whole range. Then we create this divide between ourselves.
Yeah. You disconnect. And that's what happens with a lot of marriages, like that lady I was talking about. She is in the process of disconnecting from her husband. And that doesn't need to happen.
The conversation I had last week was with Larry McInnes, and we talked about the preventable affair, which is exactly the same thing. The conversation you didn't have. And then now we add this in, and we add in not sharing the emotions, not being available to your own range of emotions, and then not acknowledging the other person's range of emotions, because you're coming from a place inside yourself that has been so hurt by that one-time occurrence that you have no space for the other person's pain.
That's right. And what also happens, I think, is that that moment builds on others, or other moments similar to that build on one another until you've got a collection of being rejected or put down, um, devalued. And that's for me, that's very important, and that's one of the things that I've learned. You've got to value yourself, and that I think that's a struggle for a lot of people. Self-criticism and the imposter syndrome, but also acknowledging the pain, where the pain might be coming from for someone else. It's like now I will say things like, someone might make a judgment, and I'll think or say, but you don't know the backstory.
Mm.
You don't know the story behind the story. And until you know that, you don't know anything, and you can't make a judgment.
Mm.
And that's
Yeah,
something that
it's
I've learned.
true. Now, when we go back to this, to what you've just said, if you get, if you have someone on the other side who is criticizing you or not open for your emotions, or who decide for you, how likely are you going to be able to share your feelings?
You won't. You can't pour from an empty jug.
Mm. Mm.
And if you're not aware or can't express your feelings, how can you cope with someone else's?
Yeah.
You can't, because
Mm.
there's nothing there.
But you see, I want to now go to this beautiful woman that's your client. And I want to say, what are you doing? What are you contributing? Where did you start from? You know, I've been the woman who wanted to educate my husband on what he should think and do. And when I came from a place where I had the best intentions. And I really thought that I was doing the best. I didn't do it to be mean or anything else. But it doesn't take it away. I had a quite constant raising of a bar going on, you know. And it's not that some of it was undeserved. Um, it, it, yeah, it was simple things like he's from Namibia and he would have walked around in short pants and without a shirt his entire life, barefoot. If somebody didn't go like, really? This is a business. You really think you can come and work barefoot with, with shorts on and no shirt? So it started with that kind of thing, but it actually really wasn't my business. And I think it depends on the way in which you do it. If you do it from a parenting kind of way, a judgmental kind of thing, and it can start fairly innocent about something that feels very obvious to you. But if you get in that habit, if you get in the habit of editing the other person or thinking for them or criticizing their thoughts or constantly wanting to move them to a new level, you are not a safe place to receive that man's feelings.
No, no, you're not. Because what happens with that is that, for me anyway, each time he gets criticised or she gets criticised, they can say, "Oh, well, pass it off."
Mm.
It's like, oh, it's too small a thing to worry about. The problem with that is that it doesn't go anywhere. It goes inside.
Mm.
And then something else happens, and you finish up with another one, and you finish up with a cluster of things. And one day, that cluster will collapse. And that's when you'll have not a breakdown, that's the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
And Mary and I have got a thing now. She was saying, my straw's becoming like a hay bale.
Yeah, yeah, I
We use
understand that.
humour. We use humour a lot to, you know, to get
Humor
through
is a
this.
good, I love it. You know what? Humor is a really good way to get through. I do couples counseling, and I get to a point where I say we don't have to focus on the negative anymore. We can start seeing what went wrong, what went right this week, and what was good for you. And let's start with that. And I
Mm.
get to a point where we can say, let's start let's start supporting each other and let's not make everything this heavy thing. Let's use a bit of humor to get through it. Because we can usually find a way back to each other if two people are willing to work on it. But
Yes.
if I'm a person, and this happens with men as well, there are men who are super critical of their wives and who think for them and decide for them and demean them. And so it happens from both sides that we have those places where there's not that mutual respect for each other's feelings and rights.
One of the things that, you know, I believe you're saying is that for me, I still make mistakes like that. I still will demean somebody, or not intentionally, but I've done it. The difference now is that as soon as I realise that I've done that, I actually address it. More particularly with Mary, my wife. You know, if I've upset her, I will almost immediately say, and we've got an agreement that if one of us gets pissed off, if you know, with the other, or not, annoyed with the other, we will talk about it within 24 hours. And even if that's to the point of saying, I'm not ready to talk about it yet, I'm still too annoyed or upset, at least it's on the table. It's not a mystery. It's not somebody sort of protecting themselves by not speaking about it and then acting out, like ignoring or being snappy. And the other person said, what are you snappy for? You know, that's, what have I done? And so
I
we
think,
communicate.
but I also think you're touching a point there which is quite important, that it's not only the person. Say you were mean. It's not only the person who did something that was out of line. It's the other person has got the equal human right, adult right, to say, "Oh, whoa, stop the boat. Why are you talking to me like that? Why do you think you can talk to me like that?
Mm.
And can you please do something about it?" Because that's what creates the balance in a relationship.
One of the quotes that John Savage, the American psychotherapist that taught me all of the things that I know, um, he said one of the he asked somebody and what the secret to life was, and this guy said to live in the and, between love and hate.
Oh, okay.
Live in, that's the balance. Stay in balance, because there's polarities in everything that we do.
Yeah, so what
So
we really say is find the balance.
yes, and then live in balance, live in the and. But that's stay with me, because that's you'll see that everywhere. People will go from one extreme to the other, and as they get upset, the more upset they become. If they're the sort of person that wants to lash out, or the sort of person that goes inside themselves, that gets more extreme. So you've got to live in the top part of that, where you vacillate, you move between the two,
Yeah,
rather than go.
I, I talk a lot about balance, and whenever I talk about it, people say to me, "But how do you do that, Louise?" And I always say, you find out where the two is. If it's too this, if I'm too quiet, I can't be too quiet. If I'm too harsh, I can't be too harsh. I've got to find the place where I'm there. So the two is the guide to what we don't want to do, and then the rest, what remains, is the balance.
That's right. It's one of the skills I teach too is story of polarity listening. It's where you listen for what is not said, because therein lies quite often the person's pain. It's what they don't talk about. and that's because they're not living in the and at
Mm.
that moment in time. You know,
It makes
it's
perfect sense. So I want to
yeah,
ask you, so there was for 20 years, and then after the 20 years, and this is a normal story for people. So something happens, like your client's husband who's going to get some rude awakening, and then he'll probably wake up and start wanting to do something. So, and that's the normal story, unfortunately. When we start working is when we get the rude awakening. And so you realized, you came to the conclusion that something was out of line in your life. And then you had to do some repairs in your relationship. And so,
yes.
how did you set about? That's the point that I think that's the really important point. That point when you realize, but okay, you know what, I could have done better here and here. And how do you then set out to start these relationship repairs? Do you start with having a conversation with your wife, or what do you do first?
For me, it was a case of I attended this with John Savage, a workshop that he ran on communication skills, deep structure listening or deep listening. And part of that course was understanding yourself. And part of it, the benefits of that course is that you get a lot of self awareness and also how you're impacting others and so forth. So um, after that course, which was a 7 day, quite intense course, um, I actually studied a lot of the things, and I spoke with John quite extensively over a couple of years. And then, because I was in my 40s at the time, that's also a time when you reevaluate your life. And in the course of that reevaluation, I actually went down inside myself and had a good look at the dark side, and that was a bit scary, to be honest. Um, and it wasn't easy, but by crikey, am I glad I did it, because after a while, if you stick at it, and it took me probably 2 or 3 months, not in one go, but by doing this, by sitting down and just focusing on the internal, um, I was actually able to see the old cliche of the light at the end of the tunnel. And there is light at the end of the tunnel, but you've got to be vulnerable. You've got to be prepared, for me anyway. I had to be prepared to say, I am capable of hurting someone that I love. I'm capable of almost anything as a human being, which we all are, I think. So that admission to myself, and I suppose with regard to Mary and repairing the relationship, um, it was the relationship was still quite good. It's just that one aspect that when she upset me, that I was really like ice. Um, when I told her that, she sort of said she didn't realise, but I just said to her, that isn't happening anymore. I'm not gonna conceal. If I want to cry, I'm going to cry. That's the end of it. That's the beginning and the end. And if you can't cope with it, or you get upset because I'm not a man enough, that's your problem. And then she didn't have that problem.
I want to applaud now. Yeah, I wish that everybody could have this experience, and that people don't have to run into a wall where their relationships are completely broken apart before they realize this.
Mm.
But at least we have these examples so that we can share that it is possible. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, this is a long one. I accepted that I'm human. I had to acknowledge that aspect of my personality. I had to own the fact that I have a power of choice. And so the ice inside of me melted. The rock shattered into tiny pieces. Following this insight, my wife and I had one of the most meaningful conversations we ever had. The barrier I had created dissolved. I was free. My love was released and free to flow. What a relief. Okay, I don't know how that ended up in there. That is the last time you'll ever see me cry. The second stage was when I understood the staggering influence our subconscious play in our behavior and decisions. What am I going to do with my burdens of wrongs? For me, there was only one answer. I had to come to terms with the past and accept that I had harmed a person I loved. I had to admit I was and still am capable of harming others. The issue isn't that we make those assumptions, but that we act as if they are true. Simple, clear communication skills can stop relationships from falling apart. And I think, Alan, this is what you are all about the clear communication skills.
Yes, because so many marriages and relationships, business relationships as well, but particularly marriages, and when they don't need to. Sure, you get the times when people are just incompatible,
Mm.
uh, and things happen. But most of the time, if they're prepared to communicate openly and vulnerably, then they can get the insight that actually says, "Hey, there's still a lot here. We don't need to divorce or separate. It's just
Okay,
simple, honest, open communication." But
okay.
most of
Now
us are afraid of that.
mm, carry on.
No, I was going to say because we'll get judged,
Mm.
and that's it. So, yeah,
Yeah, sorry for interrupting. Um,
that's all right.
okay, because we are talking about interruption, about communication. And so interrupting somebody in between. Now, I do the same. I I talk and then I stop and I think. And then because people think I'm done, they will jump in. and uh, so but I've learned, it's part of who I am now. I've learned to think about what I'm saying. In order to do that, I actually have to stop and think about what I'm saying. I don't want the words to rush out of my mouth. I want to think. And when people think silence, I need to jump in. So sorry about that, but I think it's a
So,
really good, yeah. Um, okay, so let's talk about the fear of why people don't speak.
because they'll get judged,
Mm.
and the other
So,
person will apply their life beliefs and the way they look through at the world to you, and they'll
mm,
make an assessment. And
mm,
quite often, if you're prepared to be out there a little bit, that judgment is not favourable.
mm, yeah. So if we take it all and we put it back together, it is you started your journey by working on yourself. And part of your journey was to acknowledge where you went wrong and how you hurt somebody else and realize that you wanted to make amends for it. So you needed to do some repair work with and had the conversation with your wife and then found a new way to go forward. But before you got there, you did some extensive work on yourself, which is, I think, so important to understand. You're not going to wake up one day and be a different person. You actually have to say, this is the work that's the most important in my life.
I think it actually started um, even before all of that. I don't know if I wrote about it, but when I was in Borneo making a video, I sat on the side of this cliff. It was this 2,000 foot, 2 or 3,000 foot straight limestone cliff. And I was looking out over the jungle. And then I thought, how insignificant as a human being I am. I could slip off that ledge and nobody would ever find me. I'd be gone. What difference, like 2 or 3 years later, you're gone out of memories and all. So, first of all, I think you have to be willing. And that's where I said, I'm not insignificant. I have got some significance. but I don't know what it is, and I want to find out. And I was curious to the point where I came home and I said to Mary, I'm not going to turn into a religious nut, but I'm going to read the Bible. And I read because I think the answers that I'm seeking are in the Bible. Well, some of them were and some of them aren't. But in 18 months, I read the Bible from front to back. I read it all. And that's when I started, during that process, I started the process of introspection, having a look at who I am as a human being, as a man, as a husband, as a father, and so forth. And so, I found peace in that. It wasn't easy to do, but as I said before, I'm bloody glad I did it, because otherwise, if guys don't do that, if they don't become vulnerable, they end up bitter, cranky, cantankerous old men. And I know a few of those.
Me too. I think that women have a natural curve of self-introspection. I think having children has a lot to do with it, because you have an idea of how you want to do better by your children, and you have an idea of how you don't want to parent your children. And I think that makes you introspective, because you have to then look at yourself, your own upbringing a bit, if you want to be actively doing things differently with your own children. But also because women are just way more emotionally connected, and we will share our feelings with each other quite freely. We will usually have a circle of one to a few really good friends that we will share our feelings with. Now, I think that sharing of feelings that we do naturally also helps us to grow. And then we suddenly get to a point where, like, where's the man? Why didn't that man grow with me? And like, how do I get something out of him, please?
I think that's, for me, and I haven't, of course, but giving birth to a child would have to open your mind as well.
Mm-hmm.
To the bigger possibilities, to the fact that you're not just a woman. You've given life, and the physical process of pregnancy and then giving birth would have to be a growth experience that no man can ever experience. So, but I also think that women are more connected with their emotions, a lot more. Most women are, some aren't. But the problem starts for me, I think, when in the 40s, because women, and this is generalization, okay, which I know we can't do, but for the basics of trying to make the point, let's say in the past, a woman in her 40s had been a stay-at-home mum. And so when she reaches 40 and she reevaluates her life, she says, I want to move out. I want to experience life. And yet the guy who's been working a lot, has missed out a lot of home life, says, hey, I want more home life. I want time with my family. So you got the woman saying, I want more independence, and the husband saying, I want more family time, I want more togetherness. And if they can't bridge that gap, that is going to cause issues. But, as I said, we reevaluate our choices in our 40s. And that process itself leads to a lot of divorces, but only if they would communicate and they would share the growth. Which I'm glad to say, I think Mary and I have now, as close as two people can get in that regard. So vulnerability, being aware, being available,
Mm.
and not being scared of your emotions.
I think that the wheel is now turning because I've just talked to a dad who took his 10 days parental leave to be there and to be the father to the older child and to help his wife during this period of childbirth. And where he said to me, this is the first time ever he's really bonded with the oldest child because he's become the caregiver.
Mm.
So, Alan, I want to ask you the other quote because I see it's not on there. Because I'm pretty sure you're the one who said it, but we can still talk about it even if it wasn't you, but I still think it's you. If guys, if you want to be with an emotional being, and you've got to understand that a woman as an emotional being and your children are emotional beings, you have got to realize that you have to be emotional beings.
If you try and deny the fact that you're an emotional being, you're denying yourself. You're actually denying the reality of who you are. You're you're not living a life. You're living a life that someone else has probably determined for you because you haven't reassessed your own. And if you're not living with your emotions, well, you're living a half life. And
And that one is true. That one is really true. And if you if you don't live with your emotions, you live on the surface. You only have that thin sliver of life experience. You're not living deeply, fully available if you only live there.
it's interesting because if one of the things that I've learned is that if you've got three lines. Whoops, three. The center line is where you are now, but the problem is if you don't keep working on yourself, it descends into and joins up with a red line, which eventually just leads to nowhere, to nothing. But you've got an opportunity to hop on this line, which is say green, and this is where you get new life. And so you'll never be as close as you are now to that green line. So it doesn't matter when you make the decision to get on that green line and start to grow and start to acknowledge your humanity, your faults, your mistakes, and all the good times. And before I forget, one of the things that Mary and I do a lot of, and that is we use humour. It's like I said, the straw that broke the camel's back a bit earlier on. And she says it's becoming a hay bale. It's like that. So humour is essential. But so it doesn't have to be all heavy stuff.
Okay, so in the next 3 or 4 minutes, I'm going to ask you to answer the impossible question. And I know it's the impossible question, but we all have to start somewhere because we've been talking about men and like really encouraging them to be emotional beings. But I think to be that woman on the other side, like you say, your client who's ready to walk away because it's become unbearable. And at her wits end. And I mean, I've been there too. Really, really struggled to get my husband to open up. And to be at the point where you understand that you can't live this life anymore, but you're still trying, you're desperate, you're still trying, you still want to fix it. What do you say to that woman? And I know I'm only giving you 2 or 3 minutes, so I know it's impossible.
God. She's actually not a client, she's a friend of mine. So, but I asked her, I guess, do you love your husband still? And the answer was yes. Do you want to leave him? The answer is no. Definitely no. That was a year ago. Now it's not so strong a no.
Mm.
But I, th- I think what I would say, what I basically said to her is, I've got a couple of models that we use for relationship building, and one of them is how to maintain long-term relationships, and that's called the pinch crunch model. You've probably heard of it. It was written, I think, back in 1923 and registered as the raw renegotiation model. You've got to look at your expectations, and they've got to be under constant review. The other thing, and that's what I said to her, you've got to talk to your husband about what do you expect out of life. This is what I expect. What do you expect? And that sort of thing. So get clarity. And then the other model, which shows what happens if you don't get clarity. If you do just stuff the emotion inside you and don't say anything, or it's ignored. And I gave her the model. I said, show it to your husband and tell him where you're at. And she did both of those, and he still doesn't get it.
Okay, so Alan, now what we're going to do is next week you're going to give your friend this book that we are publishing, and you're going to say, read this, and then you give this to your husband and ask him to read it. Because now we have something that can tell
Yes,
people there can be more before we
that's
run into
right.
walls and lose what's most important to us. We can learn to reconnect, and we can learn to feel, and we can learn to understand ourselves.
That's great. That's what we need.
Yeah, we
Um,
need it. And we need to keep on having these conversations and build awareness that it's possible and that guys have done it and that people have been able to repair their relationships or at least not repeat their mistakes in the next relationship. Because sometimes when you wake up, it's too late.
that's
So,
that what's going to happen. That's what
mm,
happens with so many people, that they don't. Their awareness isn't there. They don't look at their expectations. They don't talk about the expectations with the other person, and the same thing happens. I'll tell you what, though. Very quickly, a few people that I've said about this, about the expectations for new relationships, some of them have stuck, but some of them have said it made separation easier because we just didn't fit.
mm, mm.
It's we realise that there's a difference and that we're not going to be long term because we're not long term compatible.
Yeah, but there's also the other side of it because in the end, most of the couples that I work with remember why we got together. Once they get rid of all the heartache in between and once they learn to communicate properly, it is so much about the communication and working on yourself and leaving behind what happened in the past and starting clean slate at one stage. Because then you can remember why you work together, and you can also really show up as a much more mature person yourself, which makes growing a new relationship very possible. But sometimes we can mess it up so bad, we can damage it so badly that
Mm.
people just get at a place where we just cannot reconnect. But this expectation thing is actually quite a big one because if you get stuck on your expectations that you had when you were 19, or your expectations that you have never actually even communicated about. Like those are two different things, but both of them can trip you up. But we also get very stuck on believing that whatever has been going on for the longest time can never change. And we become really scared to hope that it can get somewhere. But it can. And I'm
Yes.
so happy that you are sharing your story and how you went through it and your steps and all the everything else that we didn't talk about today that's in the book, in the chapter, and that's going to help so many people. So
Cool.
we're going to end our recording now. So I just want to tell everybody that we are going to premiere this live, but we did the recording before the time because we're in very different time zones and because you are in Australia. When we air it here, you are fast asleep, and we didn't want to do that, so we are recording it earlier. And so it is not a live recording like we normally do. You can't get trolled like I got trolled last week. But you can still post your comments, and please go ahead and post them. And don't forget to give us those hearts, because you know how about those hearts and the likes and shares. And if you have any questions for me or for Alan, just put them on the Facebook page. And if anybody wants to get hold of Alan, you're doing what now, Alan? Just tell us quickly.
We put a course together, and we're focusing on carers and survivors, stroke survivors, but traumatic brain injury, and also long-term paraplegia and so forth. So that's what we're putting together, a community of supporters, because nobody can really understand what it's like for a carer unless you've been a carer. And I haven't been, but I've been talking to, well, part of the team members we've got are both the carers and survivors, and it's been a fantastic experience. So that's where we're focused on that.
And I'm going to ask you to also send that details to me, please, Alan. I will share the details of your course in my next email, so that people can know how to get hold of you. Just send it to me. Now, everybody who has been watching this, please keep on commenting and keep those coming, and show up for our next one, which will be next week again. And now I am thinking that we are most probably going to publish our book at last this weekend, because the book should be done formatting by tomorrow. So I just have to check it. Then I can upload it and our book can go live. So keep on watching the emails, keep on watching wherever you are finding us, YouTube, Facebook, wherever it is. We are going to have this amazing, really important book out soon. And everybody wants this book, I promised you. Okay. Thank you so very much for coming.
Thank you for having me. That was really good. I've loved every second of it.
And thank you for all your wisdom that I have been able to borrow and help other people with. I really appreciate and love talking to you. Thank you, everyone. See you soon. See you next week.
Okay.